What up, witches, and welcome to Witchin and Bitchin, a podcast. I'm your host, Darren.
And I'm Vicky. How are you all today? Sorry, I can't stop saying that.
Why do you laugh when I talk now? Am I that comical?
Sorry, I don't know. Yes,
okay. This is a very serious podcast, Vicky.
I know.
I can't even get that sentence out without laughing. So, guys, we've got a real special treat for you today. Full disclosure, I've been doing some day drinking, and it's on theme, though, with what we're going to be talking about today. So we're actually interviewing a very special guest. So he's a dear friend of mine. Buck is currently living on Wurundjeri land, also known as Melbourne, Australia. He's been called to exploring the craft for over 20 years, but his magical and spiritual path developed from rather eclectic and spirit-led origins as a child. So Buck's journey has led him to explore reclaiming witchcraft, his ecstatic devotionals and marriage to Dionysus, and the path of the vampire. His main trainings has been in the tradition for men who love men, and after 6 years of exploration and training, he became an initiated brother of the Unnamed Path and is now a formal teacher, and I believe the only one in Australia, or the first one as well. So Buck's craft practice is often ecstatic, and he works mostly in spellcraft, incense making, herb craft, and root work, spirit journey work, and divination. So how I met Buck is actually through a group that was called the Queer Pagan Men Australia, which is basically an online space that was created so that gay men could get together, and that obviously expanded out. Now it's, I believe, Queer Pagans Australia, Buck, if you correct me if I'm wrong. Yep. So, but basically after 9 years of managing that side of things, he actually handed the reins over and to focus on his new role as a teacher of the Unnamed Path. So he's held rituals and workshops in the USA and in Australia, has written articles and been interviewed in a number of publications and podcasts over the years. And now we're adding one more to that list. So please welcome our very special guest, Buck Agrios.
Thank you very much. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I really do need to work on the grammar of that bio.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
No. Oh, good.
Thanks for having me anyway.
Of course.
Thank you so much for being here. Let's
wait. Pause for 1 second though.
Oh no. See, this is what
No, but see, this is why, guys, for full transparency, this is why I said that day drinking is fine, because we're on trend because of Buck's bio, that he's actually married to Dionysus, who is the god of wine and all things fun. So if you're listening to this episode and you want to crack open a drink with us, then cheers. Sorry, Vicky, continue.
I'm going to cheers mine so you can't see it out of camera.
Why? What are you drinking, Vicky? Come on.
I'm not telling everybody.
Okay.
It's embarrassing now. So let's start how we always start with all of our guests. How would you define a modern witch? Look at you. Don't have to be so scared about it. I promise it's not that bad.
Well,
it's a hard one though, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on the day. So I guess we can say these days TikTok.
Yes.
No, I'm joking, obviously.
What, are we talking about cursing the moon or whatever that thing was that they did?
Yeah, well, the next generation after InstaWitch. But no, I don't know. Far out. What a question. A modern witch is... That's a how long is a piece of string thing to me, in all honesty, because I'm not about to tell someone who is a witch and who isn't a witch. If you identify with that and you actually feel a calling to transformational work, and some people that might just be their own balance with their own shadow. Some people it might be all about manifestation. Some it might just be twinkling some crystals. Some it might be blood and a goat at the crossroad. But whatever it is, it's all part of it, I guess.
That's it.
I've been around the community way too long to even dare say what someone is or isn't when it comes to that. Do I identify the same as a number of other people identify? No. Quite often not. I have, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's a label. It's more about what you actually do. A lot of people love the label of a witch, and that's, I guess, where I'm being quite a flip about the idea of a TikTok witch and Insta witch and all of that. It's like, as long as you got the right filter and the great outfits and a little pentagram, then you can be.
And the right eyeliner. You need the eyeliner as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
yep, that's right.
But that's not to say that's not a stepping stone to someone then actually opening up, the Book of Aradia and going, oh, or actually it being a pathway to a deeper exploration of what that becomes. So it's less of a little label you're wearing, and it's actually a name you can embody.
Yeah.
So I think there's there's two sides of it. Definitely there's a place to be held for everyone to explore it their own way.
Yep.
And then there's also the other side of me that has absolutely no time to hold anyone's hand around that. Is like, okay, do the work, read the books, shut up and fucking listen and learn. And but call yourself a witch if you want.
Oh, you bitter old queen, you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. No. That actually is a bit of a segue into my next thing, because from my understanding, like, you've actually been quite active in the greater witch community for, like, before the internet. Or for the very...
Sorry, like
what? Well, no, the internet only came out in the late 90s. The internet was the late 90s.
Social media really explosion.
I'm being a bit tongue in cheek with you, but like I'm also of the pre-internet era. But like for you, like, you were very, from what I understand, you were very public and like connected with a lot of witches even before like internet became a real thing, right?
Yes and no. Actually, when it comes to the actual witchcraft and pagan community, no, not really.
Oh.
My exploration of witchcraft and spirituality, and I didn't even use labels of paganism. I actually, in all honesty, back then had no, like, in my teen years and that, didn't quite understand what pagans were, or paganism was. But for me, it was doing my own bits and pieces, buying books at the little occult store in Sydney back in the day. And it was more tarot cards that I started with. I got my first deck, I think I was 16. A friend bought me a deck of tarot cards. And so as far as community kind of things go, and actually getting to understand that whole dynamic, I didn't really jump into it until probably 12 years ago. Like really deep into it. Before that, like I knew a bit of it, but I was just doing my own thing and really exploring my own way. But as far as community and doing any kind of practice with other people in that kind of way, no, it's actually only about 12 years.
Okay, but you, by my understanding, is you did some form of community work even before like Facebook. Obviously, I guess when I say pre-internet, it's pre-social media, like Facebook, Instagram, like, because you were on the what did they used to call them? I was a Merc kid. You were in those like what's the groups called?
News groups.
Yeah, news groups.
Okay, yeah. So that wasn't actually witchcraft community. That was pagan.
Oh, okay.
That was vampire community.
Oh wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, that the vampire community was definitely my beginnings of any connection to community in that way, which is really quite strange for a lot of people, because I know in the witchcraft community, a lot of people still don't even know that there is such a community.
Yeah, that's
right. They are every cliche of hiding in the shadows, but they kind of are. It's hard to find any of the a lot of vampire community out in public. But this was 97, 96, 97 was where I first started to connect, and that was actually through books. I back in like 96, I think, was where I got my very first book that was looking at real vampires and human living vampires and living community around it. And the back of that book had a list of different websites which were all sort of news group led, and that's where I sort of jumped in. So that side of the community, and then early 2000s, when I stepped out of that, I sort of focused on my own stuff. And then it wasn't only until about 12 years ago that I really got involved in a witchcraft community as such.
So you go, actually.
No, you go.
I was just gonna say.
You, mate.
Yeah.
Go for it. I'm getting kicked. Go. You go.
Okay, sure. No, I was actually just going to say, like, while we're on that topic, though, because honestly, I'm not going to sit here and ask you all the stupid, dumb questions that are going to make you want to stab yourself with a fork in the eyeball. But just in regards to the vampirism community, in a very general sense, because I know what makes a vampire is going to be just as much of a convoluted question as what makes a witch. Because I know that, like, you're not the type of person to say, well, I'm going to define it for everyone, and if you don't fit this definition, then you're not one, because I know you're not like that. But I guess in your worldview or in your experience, what would you say would be the practices of a vampire that, like, because people are going to the unknown, people are going to be like, oh, they drink blood and they do this and they do that. And we're just like, no, that's all Hollywood.
Yeah.
So
some of them do drink blood. When you're talking about the vampire community, it was when I was first coming into it back in the late 90s, it was interesting because even then they were still sort of defining who they were and the differences. And you've got to recognize at this point in time, you had so much happening as far as tabletop role play. Vampire Masquerade had come out. You had movies like Interview with a Vampire,
such a good movie,
out around that time. Obviously Buffy was a thing at that time. So there was lots of space for popular culture connections to it. Now, it also ties in a lot with the goth community as well. So straight away, you have a lot of lifestylers, people that love the aesthetic and the archetype in a way. And archetypes, as we know through witchcraft, can also become something else. So the lifestyler is, and still today, possibly the biggest part of the community. And I do accept lifestylers as being part of the vampire community, definitely.
100%, yep.
Do they all do the exact same things? Maybe not. It's kind of like saying that a witch that only works with crystals and does Reiki is not a full witch, or a witch that only does spells but doesn't do, transcendental meditation is not a witch. You can't do that. So the lifestyle part is a big part of the community, but there's also when I was coming to the news groups, there was this break that started to happen between sanguinarian vampires, who are blood-feeding vampires, and psychic vampires, energy-based vampires. And even that evolved, and there's so many subcategories under that. And there's also crossovers. Some psychic vampires also do drink blood. And then there's a whole other section where you've got psychic vampires versus psi vampires, which it's the difference between unconscious energy vampires, emotional vampires and drainers, and a little tongue in cheek, we just call them empaths in the witchcraft community.
No, I love it because it's so true. So you said like empaths,
but we, there is a space for authentic empaths, and there's just a whole lot of space for emotional vampires who just call themselves empaths. But there was a lot of space between that. And then the point about people going, well, I'm a medical saying, I need the blood to physically do something, which I also, even as a witch, I still believe in science. And I also recognize there's a space for things that we don't know and can't measure as well. But there's also a category of vampires, or groups of vampires, that work with what you probably term more as life force, where it's not because they're depleted in any way, but rather they have this way of tapping into life force energy to actually build and strengthen and evolve their own journey. And there's a lot of vampires out there who it's very spiritual, some who it's just purely an energetic kind of thing, but there's no spiritual path to it. Not all vampires practice magic by any means. So there's so many different categories. And then there's a whole bunch of crazy too. There's a bucket load of I'm the immortal, 500-year-old child of, and it's like,
so you're telling me that you're not 1,000 and something years old?
No,
Oh.
I'm not. Though your comment about pre-internet kind of thanks, Shay. No. So look, when I was coming into the community, there was so much work still being done in identifying an identity, and also because there's a lot of problematic projections on the community, and a lot of really dangerous people that are drawn to it. You know, you've definitely got a lot of predatory behaviors that can appear.
Oh yeah,
that.
I can imagine. I mean, I don't know, but I could just assume.
Yeah, but it's kind of like any fringe sort of community. Like you look, you know, I'm not part of it, but I know of in BDSM community and things like that, and kink community, where you know you need to have clear languaging and boundaries and know where those things are. So yeah, back in the late 90s, leading into the early 2000s. The community just kind of was tearing itself apart with, you know, this is what a vampire is, this is what it is, and you're not one, I'm one, blah blah blah. And I'm fairly sure we gave birth to the troll on the internet, because we didn't have social media back then, and we weren't engaging on that level. We didn't understand that, and just the level of trolling in the community, and that's actually what finally made me step away from it. I did meet a few people who identified as vampires in person back in the early 2000s. Some of them, a little bit nutters. But when it came to people that could talk about it on a level that also included anything to do with spiritual work or anything to do with the esoteric, it was far and few between. And like some of the first organizations for the real vampire community, the first one, the Order of the Vampire, I think was 78. And then you've got the Temple of the Vampire, who wrote the Vampire Bible, came out in early 80s. So a lot of the early groups that were doing work with the vampire or as vampires actually do connect to esoteric work quite strongly and quite deeply. A lot of it actually traces back, like the Order of the Vampire actually traces back to the Church of Satan, the early days of that. And a lot of the magics that you see in those are very much sort of ceremonial and high magic kind of work. Again, that's not my kind of bag. I'm ecstatic through and through. And I still explore my work through that way, connected to the vampire work. But back then, that wasn't a conversation. It was all about, psychic vampires versus blood vampires versus role players. And so it was a long journey, and I got my fangs permanently done back then. So back in 1999, I got permanent fangs put in.
How on earth did you manage to find a dentist that would be willing and like consenting and like all above board to do that? Because that in itself is a huge achievement.
Was that a hard thing to find someone to do it?
Yeah, definitely. I went to multiple dentists and finally found a guy who he was actually quite young for a dentist, and he specialized in sort of making dentures and things like that as well. And I just think I caught him at the right time, where he was just sick of looking at yet another toothless mouth to make dentures for. And here comes this little,
I was going to say, it'd be exciting, wouldn't it?
Here comes this little guy coming in going, hey, I want fangs. And now, obviously, dentists will never do anything to your mouth that could cause any damage or permanently alter the alignment of your mouth or your teeth. So he said, look, let's have a look at your mouth. And when we chew, we don't chew up and down, we actually chew side to side. So you actually need space for your canines to actually move as you grind side to side. And I just happen to naturally have the perfect amount of space to have fangs. So he got really excited by it. He was actually as excited as me. It was really good.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, but and that was a big, obviously, not a choice you make lightly.
No.
And because I recognize that for the rest of my life, when people look at my teeth, there's gotta be, and I purposely, obviously they're small enough, they're small enough to get away with.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure like they're small enough, but at the same time, they're also big enough to know that you kind of. I'm sure you get a lot of quizzical faces like, huh?
Yeah,
like,
but not enough for people to actually say anything. They look and kind of go,
yeah.
Oh. But,
or maybe they're too scared to because they think that you're 1,000 or 5,000 years old and that you're gonna drain them dry.
That's fine.
I'm joking.
But yeah, so I was very involved in the vampire community. I had my own news group, which was the Australian Vampire Association, which was resources. Sorry,
I was going to say, how very official of you.
I was about to say,
the Australian Vampire Association,
and that was for people to find networks and all that. But look, I just got over the BS and the drama, and a lot of it international. And so I stepped away from it, and I thought, let's go into a much calmer community. Let's go to witchcraft.
I was about to say.
I was gonna say, like, let's go to a calmer community, and then you went to queer pagan men.
Yeah. Yes.
Like karma. I'm pretty sure we're all the drama.
I know.
Anyway,
I know.
Sorry.
Yeah. Choice.
By the way, no teenage shade to all of our brothers out there who are queer pagan men. I'm just being a bitchy queen because I can be, because it's my show.
And not yours.
Exactly. Not to quote like Katja and Trixie or anything, but because it's our show and not yours. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
I don't even know if I answered your question in all.
No, you did.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
No, it was great because it was
You
great.
did.
We found out lots of other stuff as well, which is brilliant.
Cool.
It's like when we touch on a topic where you see us just go,
Yeah.
That means we've hit like podcast gold, because it's something I'm like, I knew nothing about this, and you're just like,
yeah.
Well, trust me, it's a subject I could talk on forever because there's a lot of history and a lot of detail in it. But I know
it's a good thing that you're immortal then.
About that. Yeah.
I was gonna say it's a good thing you're immortal, because then you can talk about it forever.
I'm not immortal.
I'm joking. Anyway, Vicky, you go on.
Thanks. Anyway, I was just wondering if we can then kind of, because you mentioned it in amongst all of that as well, that you do the more static type work and things like that as well. And do you also, like still keeping it with the vampire, like do you nicely kind of intertwine the two of them as well and then move into?
Yeah.
Do they kind of?
Definitely.
Sorry, I didn't articulate that.
Actually, wait, can we go one step back though? Because for some of our listeners, they may not know what ecstatic work is.
Oh, yeah.
So can you add that into your response?
Oh, yeah.
Just because for some people they'll be like, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean?
So look, in very sort of simple way of looking at ecstatic work, it is through movement and shifting of body and sound, and using the shift of energy through that technique. And through ecstatic work, its ability to shift into altered states as well through body work. So if you look like my influences definitely with things like the whirling dervishes and things like that, the Sufi dancers. I'm trained in classical Egyptian belly dancing as well, which is a combination of tight control and release at the same time. So you constantly got this fight against each other. There's a great book out there which Tommy mentioned to me some years back called Trance Dancing with the Jinn. Which
he told me about that one. I still have
it.
Yeah.
So, I'm writing that down.
So it's a fantastic book, and it looks at a technique called the Zar, which is traditionally performed, done by Middle Eastern women who feel that they've been possessed or attached to by the jinn, and they've been called to do it as a service to, and it's a way to open up to translate and also hear, but also has a soft possessionary aspect to it as well. And in that book, she goes through a lot of incredible insight into the brain's chemistry that happens through different stages of ecstatic work. So that's a fantastic book if you really want to get into like the brain chemistry and what happens and how altered states come about. And of course, ecstatic work for me very much just came as a child, being that little kid that just used to spin around, and I've danced all my life and all of that. But just knowing that there was a state that I could get into which I could shift the world around me and shift my perspective and easily leave my body and come back through ecstatic work and raising energy. That's, for most, I know it's very cliche, but for most gay guys, our church is our dance floor.
100%.
And a lot of that comes from, obviously it's a place, clubs have been the place where there's been safety and community and all that come together. And when you get that thriving, vibe of all bodies moving together to the bass and all that, that's ecstatic work.
Yeah, that's
exactly. Then, but even like, you look at Born Again and look at Hillsong, that's all ecstatic.
Yeah, that's right.
Just get the vibe going, open up, and
it's fantastic.
Look at so ecstatic technique crosses over in many different experiences of connecting with the divine, because it raises energy, and particularly in a group, it's a fantastic way of really driving an energy and utilize. When you know how to utilize and fine tune and hone that energy, that's where real magic happens. And it's one of those things that I use ecstatic technique naturally, but also I love because I can do some big stuff just on my own. I don't need a whole group, but it's something where you can also drive a whole group into it while you can focus on the work, while everyone's just being the battery behind it. And when you're talking about that, raising energy, focusing energy, working with energy in the vampire side, to come back to your question there, Vicky, is yes, because there's way that you can direct your way of feeding and drawing and directing it as well. Now, having said that, my conscious use of my witchcraft technique and my vampire world only really found a comfortable marriage together in the last few years. And I stepped away from vampire community for a long time, and only I've always sort of checked in, kept an eye on a few key people in the community. Like there's some certain names out there in the community that I've always kept an eye on, and ones that have written books and publishers and all of that. So, I see the evolution there. But it's only been in the last few years that I've actually stepped back out of the shadows to go, okay, still here. And now I've got some extra skills to bring, and that is through my witchcraft.
I love it. Do you know, it's funny, I was actually, while you were talking, I was listening to everything you were saying, and it's like, because I asked you to dumb it down for the listeners, but it's actually for me, because I was like, I wanted the definition of it, because I had an inkling of what I thought it might be, but just, I wanted to make sure before I have to obviously vet what I'm about to say on camera. Because it's funny that what you were talking about, literally like that, was like I teach dance fitness classes, and it's something that I do as a energy healer and things like that. I have this thing where I want everyone that enters my class space, like that's my church. Everyone knows I call it church. This is a sacred space where we praise the Zumba gods and whatever else. Like, I'm joking. But like, no, literally when they come in, my intention is that they always leave in a better mood than when they arrived. And so while we're all dancing and we're creating group energy of that mass movement of people to music, the music's like pumping so loud that they lose themselves in the moment. They create that energy. And what they don't realize that I'm doing on stage as an energy worker is I'm grabbing that energy, kind of harnessing it inwards and then directing it towards people gently. Because one time I got so in the moment and accidentally threw energy really hard at someone and literally saw them fly across the room. And I'm like, too much, back off. They thought they just tripped on something, but there was nothing there. So I was like, I'll just let them think that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Some of them who know me, and now that they're listening to this podcast, some of them do
I was
actually.
about to say, you've added yourself now.
But no, people have said to me, they're like, oh my God, I always leave in such a good mood after I leave your class. I'm like, you're welcome. They're like, but they don't realize that there's a lot of stuff that I'm orchestrating up on that podium. I'm not just dancing for you, for your entertainment or for your enjoyment of your exercise. Like, I'm making sure that you all leave in a positive state. So it's just interesting that you're saying this. I'm like, oh, this sounds awfully familiar. But okay, I know a little bit of your backstory, so I'm wanting to kind of dive in on that a little bit, because I know that you are a bit of a, and my terminology, not yours, but a little bit of a theater geek.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So it's like, because I've also come from an arts background, so for me that whole ecstatic dance movement, all that kind of stuff, kind of ties nicely into the work that you do. But I wanted to know, how did you kind of get into, like, was it something that you just naturally progressed to the ecstatic world, or was it kind of you identified it from your work in musical theater and dance and stuff? Did you just naturally become aware of the fact that you're manipulating energy, or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, look,
I know it's like a chicken or the egg, which came first scenario.
Yeah.
But
look, well, as a performer, you recognize that exchange of energy and that ability to shift and you know, and manipulate energy in a room just through presence and through how you engage with space. And working, particularly when you've got, you know, other people on stage with you, and particularly if you've got an audience. Now, I'm trained very much as a stage performer, and that's my whole background and experience. But I've always done it ever since a kid. I was always wanted to dance, and then went into acting training and musical theater and all of that. But it was all very a natural progression, but I had no idea what ecstatic witchcraft was.
But I guess, were you aware of what you were doing though, or was it really just a
definitely.
natural? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Over time, you know, but I didn't recognize that witchcraft was actually anything different. I recognized that stagecraft is called the craft very much for a reason. But funnily enough, I remember not acting training, but through high school drama. I went to a performing arts high school, so we're very clear about what was acting and what was high school drama. Snobs, totally. But our teacher ran us through heaps of different exercises, which were all about being able to build energy, manipulate energy, and share it between others. Many years later, I realized when I read Spiral Dance that I was actually, in my high school drama class, actually doing witchcraft, because she used Spiral Dance and the exercises out of Spiral Dance
Get out.
the drama class.
So you had an extremely progressive teacher.
Wow.
Oh yeah, like all of our teachers were progressive. Like it was a performing arts high school.
I was just
it was
just a little extra.
Just a little extra. Big time. So one of my main drama teacher, not acting teacher, used those exercises, and it wasn't until years later I realized that's what it was. So that straight away was an awakening of going, well, yeah, there really isn't a need for difference. Like that's literally it. But that's not what performance is for everybody. But for me, that's where I found the natural flow of it, because that also tied into also just as a child, how I engaged and worked with energy around me and things like that. I explored so many random little bits and pieces as a child, you know, and I was very, very blessed to come from a divorced family where my father, but my father lived in the country and out bush, and my mum, who I mainly lived with, was, you know, sort of western suburbs growing up in Sydney, but you know, city boy essentially, or suburban boy. So I got both worlds, and I got to run off into the bush and just explore and connect and listen. And you know, and I'm very blessed that both of my parents never ever talked about religion as a framework or a boundary, and neither of them were religious by any means. But both of them had a respect and a connection to nature, and taught me a lot about how to listen and how to be present. So I was that kid, very haunted kid. I was that Haley Joel Osment. I saw dead people. But I also saw spirits in the forest, and I played with energy as a kid. Everyone has imaginary friends as a kid, and I'm fairly
Really did.
sure I was just running with the fae and
Yeah.
like whatever that may be, and that line between what's imagination and what is actually going beyond that's very blurred lines, and we know that in witchcraft. We know that's a key technique in witchcraft to start out going, well, fake it till you make it, and eventually that veil drops and you realize, oh shit.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. So there was no clear line for me with that. It all just was a natural evolution, and I'm was very blessed to have that opportunity to know how to listen to my instincts, and that's what's led my whole way. And that's in my day side and my night side, or my my muggle world. I hate that, but my muggle world and my witchcraft world. So yeah.
I was actually, only because you mentioned the whole thing about being very in tune as a kid. Like Vicky and I had the pleasure of hearing about a very interesting story of you as a kid. I don't know if you're willing to share it, but the whole thing of following your intuition and how to do things and being very in tune with nature. Would you be willing to share that story publicly, or?
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you don't have to. I just thought.
Yeah, look. We were talking about where I identified my beginnings of my connection in any kind of magic working and all that, and I think this was I would have been, I think, 12 or 13 at the time, and in a situation where someone was living with us who well and truly had overstayed their welcome, a friend of the family, who was really taking that to a whole new level. And I decided that I wanted to get rid of them. And I was just whinging about them to a friend of mine, and then thought, fuck it, want to gone. And I, without having any knowledge of witchcraft techniques, at this stage, I think my main movies of reference would have been like Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And maybe like, I don't know, like we're talking like 92, 93.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but yeah, no great deep high magic. I hadn't watched Witches of Salem or anything. So I just followed my natural instincts, and I thought, I'm going to begin by cooking her a meal that she always likes to cook. And she was a fan of allspice and mixed herbs went into every meal because, well, white woman spices. But sorry, but anyway, so I started by cooking a meal using her ingredients, and then layered them over and over and really just built it up. And then I wanted elements of her to bring into that. So she used to wear these awful wigs, and I cut pieces of her favorite wigs and blended them into it. And this whole time it was just about, you really want this, and called her into it. And then it got to the point where I was spitting in it and pissing in it, and built this whole concoction. And I put it in a container with her name and dropped it off at actually what would have been a crossroads. I actually know the names of the roads and I won't say it, but strangely enough, was a crossroads, and that just came to my attention. But it was actually the dump yard behind the school I went to at the time, and I left it there.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and then shortly after she moved out. So
I'm sorry, I had to get you to share that one because
because we were talking about what was the first spell you cast kind of thing.
Yeah,
far out, like that was it. So but that was all opening up and listening. I was very much in a state of hearing what I needed to do, and when I know what I know now and go, holy shit,
Yeah.
how did I
Yeah.
know to do that
Yeah.
and that and that? Like,
That's it.
I've tried to pull apart kind of, because I'm hyper analytical and critical about certain things. Surely I must have seen something that
there was somewhere that it came from.
yeah, and I cannot, in all honesty, find any way that would have been part of it. But having said that, my on my mother's side, family connected to being naturopaths and herbs and things like that. You work with your garden, you grow from your garden, you feed from your garden, and so I understood energy of the animistic aspect of working with plants and things like that. But I was quite extreme in my animistic way of engaging from quite a young age. So yeah. Anyway,
I just love how it was so intuitive though. Like that's the thing that I just love about it is that it just had all the elements and
it wasn't my intention to begin with. It became
like it was just something you were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
Cheers to that. Cheers to following your intention as a young kid.
Why do I feel like I'm in therapy all of a sudden? Going
box of tissue.
Oh God! Surely we're not that dry.
No. It's all good.
God, if this was what therapists would have been like, I would have wanted to go to them much earlier in life. Like, having a casual drink and chatting about witchcraft. Like, sign me up. Where's my neuropsychologist?
It's just funny because it's actually not a story I tell or part of my life I actually talk about much. And it's just strange because we talked about it a little while ago, and then today I was like, holy shit, wow, unpack.
What's coming out here? That's it. So what was it like for you as somebody from a very young age, like you said, like the Haley Joel Osment of being able to see spirits and things like that? Was it difficult at times? Because I assume that sort of at the time, sometimes it's not always taken and treated with the respect that it should be.
Yeah. So perspective is I came out of the womb gay. So it was very clear that I was queer from a very young age. I was dancing, into theatre. I loved musicals. I also lived in a very rough part of western suburbs Sydney, near St Mary's, back particularly in the 80s. Not a good place.
Not a good place.
So single mum, all of that kind of stuff. So if every form of other, I was already there. So then on top of that, to be someone who literally saw spirits and would hear things and see things. And I lived in a very, very haunted house at this particular stage of my life. The property we were on was actually one of the oldest marked properties of the area back before it became a suburb.
Oh, wow.
And the house we were on sat far back from the street from any other houses because it was actually where the original frame of the old houses were. So it had a lot of history, and the area itself has a high violent area, very solid domestic violence issues, and a number of other things. So I lived in a very strong energetic space as a young child, and also being a child that was quite open naturally, obviously. And as soon as you, particularly as a gay man or a queer person, there's already that lens of sitting between the worlds, which carries into the tradition I'm part of, which is very much part of that. You're born with a shift of your soul and perspective of the world. So there's a natural ability in many cases to actually engage in different ways. But obviously, as you grow up and become a teenager, you get sick of being the weird kid. Even at a performing arts high school, you're still being a weird kid. So it became one of those things that I learnt how to block out and just disconnected from. And particularly in my later teens, you know, even the vampire world was very private. I didn't talk about that with anyone, though, you know, on my day side, people knew that I loved popular culture side of horror. I love horror and the vampire aesthetic and all that, like that lifestyle aesthetic stuff. Sure, because that's okay. But the rest of it was no one knew. And as far as working with spirits or seeing spirits and things like that, I actually remember I was organizing a party to have some friends come around to do a seance at my house. As you know, far out, I was a weird kid. But anyway, you know, 14-year-old me decided, hey, let's do a seance. Let's invite the girls around and
why not?
You know, the school caught wind. So because one of the kids heard about it, got really scared. So they told their parents, and the parents told the school, and then they called the other parents and said, no one's allowed to come. Which was great because it became the best underground little party to turn up to.
Instant credibility.
Yeah, like bam, tell a bunch of teenage girls that you're not allowed to go do something with the grades away. You know, out of the wrong side of town. Like I went to a performing arts high school, which was, you know, very, you know, it was money to get in. I was Western Suburbs and scholarship. You know, I auditioned and won a scholarship as a performer to get in. So there's a big jump between the socioeconomic environment I was around at school versus my day life. So for all these kids to come out to this rough part, to like this poor little part of town, like, you know, it's like, I didn't live in the projects, but you know, but you get the
that's it. There's
perspective,
from there, of course,
it's all that side. But you know, that didn't do me a whole lot of favors in gaining a lot of friends because I was still that weird kid. And I think from there I decided, you know what, I need to dial this down. And even for myself, I learned to kind of go numb from it. And then particularly later on when I sort of stepped away from vampire community, and I was coming into being into, you know, my 20s and already being othered. And in the gay community, unfortunately, particularly in the early 2000s, late 90s, it was very boxed. You had to fit a category. And I, you know, so I cut my hair, I shaved my beard and became the fabulous little twink that I was apparently meant to be. And I hated myself, you know, though apparently people seem to like me, but I didn't like me. So it was, for a long time, it took me to learn how to open that back up again and learn that it comes with a dial. You know, back then it was just cut it off, ignore it, shut it down, and do whatever you can and don't speak of it. So and a lot of us go through those kind of journeys stages in the witchcraft community. It's not just unique to me by any means, but as far as a haunted child, as I call myself, it does develop its own shadow. It does feed into this whole other thing that eventually you need to unpack. And luckily, with good witchcraft practice, you learn how to do that. It's a big part of it.
It's like you're almost painting a bit of a Nancy from the Craft kind of image in some of this story. I was like, what? Like, you know, the way you're painting yourself out to be this, like the kid from out in the suburbs and stuff, and it's like that kind of. I'm like, oh god. I'm like,
look. I guess I can identify with Nancy to a certain extent, not to that extreme.
Obviously. No, I just mean as being the one who's like the weirdo at school, like because she's like, excuse me, mister, we are the weirdos, like, you know.
Totally. And trust me, the Craft spoke to me so strongly.
I'm pretty sure every kid growing up in that era who's into this stuff, like I feel like if you were one of those kids who just like gravitated towards the Craft, then it was like your kind of almost like subliminal awakening. Like you watch the Craft, you're watching it for a whole nother reason to everyone else in the theater.
Yeah, because there were real things in there. There was real elements.
Yeah.
There was that dog whistle for those that know how to hear and feel it. It
Yeah.
was legitimately in there,
Yeah.
and quite subconsciously that called to many of us. And then later on, you kind of unpack and go, oh,
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
On that note, I'm actually a little bit excited. Like, I mean, obviously we're taping this in advance, so I've booked tickets tomorrow night to go see the reboot, which I'm hoping they haven't ruined it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to stay positive, thinking that it's going to be amazing and I'm going to love it because, yeah, I'm going tomorrow night to go see it. So, did you know that there's a reboot? Surely you did.
Yep.
You just let me guess. You've read the reviews and they're horrible. I'm trying to read the stoic presence of an Aries face.
I haven't seen it myself, so
Okay.
I can't comment.
Very diplomatic. Okay, so I want to fast forward a little bit because
Right.
I want to fast forward a little bit because obviously we're whining and dining as we kind of have this interview, and something that really intrigued me about your story was obviously your because I know that earlier this year you actually celebrated, is it 5 years of your marriage to Dionysus?
Yeah.
Earlier this year.
Yeah.
And by the time this airs, it's actually going to be on my 4-year wedding anniversary or 16-year anniversary with my husband. So I know that the dates don't align. I'm not doing anything like that. But like, just like for me, that was kind of exciting. Like, obviously a big milestone because 5 years is a long time to be married, even to a deity. But to our listeners who may not necessarily get it, like, how do you marry a god? Like, what's your what can you tell them about that experience, or even how you stumbled across that? Like, how does one venture into that path of marrying a deity?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too broad, but
yeah.
interpret that how you want.
Yeah. Okay. So, coming into paganism, like most a lot of pagan men go through the experience of being drawn to Pan.
Yes.
And as that young kid who used to run through the woods and see things, particularly horned and hooved things, Pan called to me very, very strongly. And I think when I came into discovering pagan community and realizing, oh, witchcraft has a community as well. It was straight away Pan popped up again. It's like, oh, you've been there all along, you cheeky little kid. And he basically took me along to meet essentially Dionysus, and that was through just exploration of different work and experiences. And then as soon as Dionysus came into my life, it was realizing that, well, there was many dreams as a child, which he was part of as well. Very, very visceral. I've unpacked enough already. I'm not going to go into that. But again, he'd always been there.
Just love it. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when I learned more of the stories of Dionysus, obviously through the Greek stories and my reaching of him, but when you look at Dionysus as a god, the different places he came from, he's the god who comes, so he's not of an origin.
But
I know.
I'm sorry, I'm a gay man. You left yourself out there.
But yes, comes and comes. But there's many different places where his mythology and languaging appears in different cultures throughout histories. And there's a certain common threads which keep popping up, and a lot of those spoke to my own life quite naturally, like really naturally. And when I realized that when I was opening up to hear while doing the work, realizing the voice and realizing the connection to, Dionysus is the god of theater. He's the god of ecstasy and ecstasis, the god that teaches us a lot about breaking boundaries. And particularly, the followers of Dionysus, or the Maenads, and a lot of what he did was to call out, particularly if you look at the Greek stories, to women to break their bounds of conformity to what society tells you you need to be and actually liberate yourself. He's the liberator, he's the freer. And there's so much that he spoke to me and my journey, and a lot of people sort of just connect him to wine, and my family on my father's side actually, where my family has connection to being the last coopers left, traditional coopers doing cooperage. We've got a family winery on my father's side, so there is under my surname on my father's side a winery. So wine has definitely been part of it. But the journey and the symbolism of what that is, that life after death and that rebirth aspect of him, and you're drinking the blood of in many ways, and what that really means. So there's so many layers to what he was singing to me personally in, and you would see people use Dionysus as just an excuse to party hard and get drunk. And no, alcoholism is not worship to Dionysus. If you really look at the stories of Dionysus, so there's a lot of confusion between him being the big drunken satyr, and that's actually Silenus. That's not Dionysus. That's someone else completely. But they kind of get, if you look at Disney's Hercules, they basically call that Dionysus, which is Silenus. And then you got Bacchus, which, the Romans decided to just forget the detail and throw everything together. The beginning of colonialism. So much to unpack there. But Dionysus is in many different layers of my life. So my journey through and to the point of marriage was really bizarre. It was my own personal journey through my practice of witchcraft and coming into community and connecting with others in community and finding, he's the first thing of a god or a deity that I actually hear and see and connect with to that level. And it was funny because I think I'd been working with the Reclaiming Witchcraft community in Australia, and there was a witch camp coming up, which literally fell on my birthday, and I got given a scholarship to attend, and it was the Dionysus witch camp.
Wow.
And it's like, there's a whole lot of
there's a lot happening there.
all at once going on. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I'll turn up.
Guess I'm going.
And through that, there's many different things that happen at witch camps, and multiple rituals that follow through themes and stories. And through one point of the ritual, there was 3 different possessions of Dionysus all at once. And there was particular experiences that happened through that, that unpack some very personal and direct things that the people embody, like in that possession, could not have known what they knew and could not have said what they had said. And that was like, whoa, okay. And part of that literally said, "You are mine." And I had already chosen I had already been given, because I was opening myself up to, my name is Buck, it's my name in many layers. And then just before the camp, I got told Agrios, because I was thinking, well, what's after Buck? What is it? And I was hearing this name, and it was Agrios, and it actually means of the wild, and it's one of the epithets of Dionysus. So it's Dionysus of the wild. So that became my surname. And then shortly after witch camp, it was clear so that I needed to devote myself to him. And my devotional, you could be a priest of Dionysus. As a woman, you could be a Maenad. Actually go to the point of actually in service to a Maenad. And there's also a lot of mystery and great stories around Dionysus and his marriage. And it was just very clear to me, no, this is a marriage that's happening. You're not devoting yourself to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
This is a marriage. So I was in ritual, massive ecstatic ritual, and a whole bunch of stuff, and Agrios transformed into my married name to him. So yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
So I mean, not to ask the stupid question, but I'm gonna. So when you're married to a god, does that mean you like you won't get married in this lifetime, or does that not mean the same thing?
Look, if we look at the Greek translation of the gods, they're all pretty fucking open and polyamorous, and the fucking moves.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that side. No, I'm not, but
it's okay. Just run with
that
it.
doesn't translate into my actual living life. But as far as could I marry someone else? Yeah, I guess. Do I want to? No.
Okay.
My relationship with Dionysus is he's in my heart. He is part of me. I've been initiated as a child of other gods and things like that. They've got their separate relationships in space. And he's not a jealous god. So what does he ask of me? Well, various things. Am I a reconstructionist in traditional Greek calendar and do all of his rituals and ceremonies and festivals? No, I don't. I really don't. Do I do some when they call to me? Yes, and that's how I work.
Yep.
And I've always held this balance between UPG, unsubstantiated personal gnosis, and also the teachings and what's been written by others through history and time. There's always got to be a balance of those, and I do balance between the two. Do I know his festivals? Yes, very well. Do I feel that they have a purpose and place in my time for my practice and my relationship with him? No. Does he tell me he needs them? No. So yeah, it's between me and him, and that's what a marriage is. It's us. And so
I love that. And it's actually like the reason I was asking is just because like I was asking for my own interest, but also because there are some people that are going to listen to it and think, oh, what does that mean? Like, because I know that with my husband's mum, so my mother-in-law, actually, why did I say my husband's mum? That's weird. My mother-in-law, like, because when she was growing up, she, like in Catholicism, she was like a bride of God. Like it was a thing that was very much a big thing back in those days. But that's very different. So I wanted to just say, in case some of our listeners have come from that kind of Christian belief system of understanding what is a marriage and all, I thought it might be relevant to kind of touch on, just to, because obviously marriage is different to everyone as well. Some people see marriage as between one and another, like monogamy, but other people are into polyamory. So what is marriage to them is a very different thing. So I appreciate you for being so candid and sharing that with us.
I won't marry another god because I don't feel I can. So it is in that way. Do I have relationships and experiences on various levels with other god forms? Of course I do. It's hardly like the Bride of Christ thing is really the married to God and Bride of Christ, and particularly like look at the nuns and and priests being married to the church. Just kind of marrying Jesus, but it has a similar element to it, but I guess it's just a devotional on a different level, a different way. It's not, my marriage means I'm more devoted to Dionysus than anyone who's devoted to a god. No, it's not a one-up technique going, oh, well, I married my god. It was just straight up.
Come on. No, I'm just joking.
It's just a different way of initiation. And it was funny because I didn't realize it was an initiation. And it wasn't till I was speaking with another witch who knows Dionysus very well. And he had said to me, he goes, but you've already been initiated. because I was talking about my Unnamed Path journey and
yep.
And he goes, and you have gone through an initiation. I said, oh, what do you mean? And he goes, you were initiated by spirit, like Dionysus. You were initiated. And it's like, oh, yeah. I thought I just kind of swore a whole bunch of stuff to him and gave over part of my soul and being to him. And gee, who would have thought that's an
there we go.
yeah. But anyway. But through my work with Dionysus, I guess I learned a lot about further technique in ecstatic work and that ability to, jump the hedge, hedge crossing and astral, as some people call it, astral work, that different languaging but there's different techniques. Yes, I recognize that. But spirit flight and opening up spaces between realms and being able to travel between realms was a big part of that. My next stage, which was inspired a lot through reclaiming work, was learning about the 3 soul alignment, and that which didn't really come through until I did my next thing, which was the Unnamed Path, which was the whole next shift of my journey. So yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Well, going with that, that next.
I was like, I'm sending the messages. Ask about that thing.
I'm like, that's where we're going. I'm like, now that we've kind of gone there, I'd really love to talk about what it's been like to actually bring almost like a new tradition over, because you are the only teacher over here, aren't you?
Yeah.
The Unnamed Path.
And you were also the first initiate, right, from Australian soil?
Outside of America.
Okay.
The first as well.
First outside of America and first teacher. Sorry, this is water, by the way. I didn't want you guys to think I've just given up on the glass and swinging out of the glass.
Oh, look, there's no judgment if you were.
I'm going to say it's fine. Go for it.
You're married to Dionysus. You get a free pass. You can drink as much as you want. Now he's going to have fizzy water coming out of his nose.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, dear. Anyway, sorry. What was the question?
So how's it been bringing it across, with the Unnamed Path? Because we spoke about it briefly with David when we were talking about what the Unnamed Path and everything was.
Just to touch on the fact is that's how I met you originally, is because I was looking into, you did roots and bones. I was what you call it. It's like not a ritual. It was like roots and bones, and through that is how from your interviews that you did with David and Tommy, is how I came across them. And then it's kind of like, now we've come full circle. Now I've interviewed all of you for my show. So, anyway.
So David was my teacher and an initiator, but also Tommy was a big part of that journey as well.
Yeah.
My journey of the Unnamed Path was quite a long one anyway. I listened to the podcast. So David's talked a lot about it, so I want to unpack everything about the Unnamed Path. But go back and listen to that interview if you haven't.
Yes.
But I had actually been listening to the podcast for about 6 years, and really integrating many of the techniques and that into my personal practice. So, I was doing my work, my personal practice, which was very ecstatic, and my work with Dionysus, and still doing my, my random little called to make things, in case I move out.
That's it.
But very much root work, spirit-led root work kind of stuff. All of that technique was naturally there. I was getting involved with Reclaiming Witchcraft community, which was really incredible and a wonderful way to connect with a community that was inclusive and held space for queer and other, and really walked its talk in many ways. So I was doing many different things, but the Unnamed Path was where I was steering and building my own practice through the podcast. And then the founder of the Unnamed Path passed away. I had got to communicate with him a few times, but wasn't ever taught by him as such. And then through very bizarre lining up of bits and pieces. Long story short, I saw a dead guy in my bed, which was him. I woke up one morning and literally saw Hyperion in my bed and goes, just fucking listen and do the work, and disappeared on me. And I hadn't had a full embodied person
there,
like kind of since I was a kid, like that level of like you're right there. And that was a moment where I thought, oh shit, because I'd kept putting off this whole kind of, should I study the unnamed, like should I go into formal study? Like I was doing it. And then strangely enough, 2 days later, David reached out, said we should chat. It was like, and David decided that I was going to be his first student, because he's a formal teacher. He'd done all the work and all that. He was the third initiated in the whole tradition. So he was trained under Hyperion, and he took me on as his very first student, which was really cool. And obviously the distance thing was strange for us both to try and to work out, negotiate. I'm very fortunate that in my day side, I have work opportunities that I travel the world quite a lot.
So there was.
I am very, very, being the witch that I am, very good at being able to coordinate trips where I need to go. I did that very well to be able to line up, to be able to do my in-person bits and pieces, and then when it came to time to initiation, I knew I wanted it to be here. I knew I wanted to be in Australia. Now, that comes with a whole bunch of stuff. I kind of had a feeling that I would be led toward eventually teaching in the Unnamed Path. That being, again, part of my day side is as a trainer. And I knew there was a lot of work to be done, not just to bring these guys who've never left the country over to Australia. So it wasn't just David.
Americans.
You
forget there's a world out there. No shade, but like a lot of Americans have not traveled outside of America. It's common.
Yeah, I've traveled more of America than most Americans.
Same.
Same. It's the Australian way. We're used to travel like around.
Yeah, that's it.
We live in the middle of a fucking ocean where we know that anywhere we go is going to be at least 10 or so hours away.
Yes.
I mean, anywhere that's not Bali is at least 10 or so hours away.
So it was. I did a lot of work to go, well, where do I want to be initiated? And by this stage, I was living in Melbourne, but I'm born in Sydney. But like, where's home? Where's my soul home? And another part of my journey, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but there's been a long family history, which became a joke in my family about, Nana has a secret, which leads to the Indigenous history of my family as well. And it wasn't until my dad was pretty much on his deathbed that a whole bunch of extra stuff came out. And we've since been able to find the names, find the connection, stolen stuff going on, but literally connected that my heritage from an Indigenous heritage is through Dungari and Gumbanga community, which is far north New South Wales. Now, so near Kempsey and North. So from around Kempsey, Port Macquarie, Coffs Harbour, that whole area is the lower areas. Dungari, upper area is Gumbanga. So that was part of my history and all that. And I stopped and thought, I really just did a journey to go, well, where's my heart home? Now, there's this place in my life that I went to as a kid, and when you're a little kid, you go on like family holidays and you kind of forget what was real, what wasn't. I thought that I'd made up this whole place called Emerald Beach. And it wasn't until much later in my life, I ended up for a short period of time moving to Coffs Harbour when I left Sydney. just to get away from city life. And I moved to Coffs Harbour, and I met some people, and they said, come to our place. We're having a barbecue. It's at Emerald Beach. It's like,
what?
What?
It's a real place.
That's a real place. So within a year, I ended up moving in with them at this house at Emerald Beach, which just sang to my heart. And my biggest healing after a lot of trauma had happened was there and in that place. And I thought, you know what, if anywhere's it sings to my heart to go, this is where it could hold me for an initiation, because it held me through my first initiation in many ways, through dealing with massive trauma. It was there. And I decided on it, and it wasn't until I thought, you know what, I'm going to read more about the area and try and connect with the Indigenous area of the land and the Indigenous stories, the actual owners of this land. Because if I'm bringing any tradition here and asking any spirit to be connected, a lot of our tradition connects with the spirit of place as well. So we do a lot of work with land-based middle world spirit. Of plant and other. So I didn't want to be the extra level colonialist coming in going, hey, I'm just going to bring another tradition here and work with my spirits here. And also I needed to be true to my own journey. Now, it was there that I actually found the Dreamtime story, which is the origin of the Dungari people and the Gumbaynggirr people all originated from this area. And it wasn't until afterwards that I'd found that out. So exactly where I was asking to be initiated was actually one of the birthplaces of my Indigenous heritage on that side as well. So if anywhere was saying it's okay, yes, welcome, that was it. I also did do work, and the guys who came over, we spent 3 days traveling around and learning about the Indigenous culture and community in the areas. We we all got very welcomed, and they got to learn a lot about the Indigenous reading of the land, of the stories of place and all of that, and a lot about some of the massacres in the area and things like that as well. So we did a lot of work there before anything to do with my initiation, and that was very important to me to go, if this is going to be planting a seed, let it be welcome and let it know on what land it is and how to integrate that. So
I love that.
Very special.
I was gonna say, I love that about your story though, because it's like, that's another thing that I jokingly said this with Vicky just in confidence after we chatted to you the other day as a bit of a pre-interview chat. I actually said to him, like, I feel like sometimes when I'm talking to you that I'm almost like looking in a future projection of me, because so much of our story has this like crossover, but yet so different at the same time. But like, I think that that's absolutely beautiful, the fact that you've got that ability to be able to do all that research into your Indigenous background and stuff like that, and just to be able to go there, talk to the people, learn about the histories and stuff, because it's something like, in all honesty, I'm saying this as a proud Australian who only recently in the last 2 years found out about my Indigenous roots. Like, there's not many Australians who actually take the time to even investigate that, Indigenous or not. So the fact that you actually did that and showed your respect and almost like asked for permission, I guess, in some ways, to bring that tradition is absolutely magical in its own right.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But I again, luckily my engagement, my network that I work closely with is communities like Reclaiming, where there's definite acknowledgement of, well, if you're working with energies and spirit, then look at where you are, work with that, be true to that. You look at a lot of Australian druidry and things like that, where we can't, we're definitely influenced and bringing in a lot of cultures that and ways of working and energetically working from different areas, and particularly those of us that work in traditions that might have been from England or Ireland and things like that. So my mum's side of the family is from Cornwall. So I definitely got a certain heritage
that
coming
too.
through there, very clearly, and that was to do with the oceans and that as well. And it's funny because my Indigenous heritage inside, the way they worked with the land was very much almost a parallel in the culture and ways of this land, because it was connecting to how the ocean meets the rivers, comes into the land, is the area of my Indigenous connection. And my family in Cornwall were the exact same. They were the fishermen and the baykeepers, and also took into the land. So so any witch, I say, if you're wanting to really tap into magic of place, magic of spirit, any form of animism, then learn what land you're on, and listen. Shut up and listen. I don't call myself an Indigenous person because I've grown up with the privilege of everything of this.
Same.
I also have not gone through the teachings and the initiations. I don't know all the stories. I know some of the language. I've been very fortunate that Gumbanger language and Dungari language are both languages that have actually been saved and taught. So part of lockdown this year, I actually started doing language classes, which was really cool.
Wow.
But I know it's part of my blood and my heritage. So that's where I stick to. But whether it is that or not for you, if you're a witch, working magic and connecting with energies of this land, or even not, everyone should. If you're living on this land, listen to this land and listen to the people who it's from. And
100%. 34-year-old me 2 years ago really wishes he could go back in time and bitch slap like the young, immature like kid at school who was like, oh, I don't want to hear about the stolen generation anymore. Because, as a kid, you don't know what you're listening to. You don't understand the complexity and the brutality, I guess, of the Australian history. And it's very easy for us to be so flippant about it and to just be like, oh, but that was in the past, leave it in the past, get over it. But it's not. It still happens.
It's built the foundations of our version of this country. And
exactly.
Exactly.
So I know exactly what you're saying. That's why I'm like, this is like just resonating on so many levels. So if there's anything like, guys, what my message is, I don't like to get political on this podcast but we're very free and open about what you want to talk about. But one thing I will say is, just to echo what Buck has said, is like, just know the land that you're on and just respect the people that came here before us, because it's important, especially as people who, like, we work in a very much a earth-based religion. We live on Terra Australis, which has been Aboriginal land for tens of thousands of years. The end. We are a blip on a blip. What was that episode that we did, Vicky, when we were talking about how, it was an episode about the moon, and I said how the moon is like 4 point something, like 4,000 and something billion years old, as is the earth. So like when we talk about history, we are not even a microscopic blip of the microscopic blip. So like, whereas Aboriginal history goes for tens of thousands of years,
65,000 and longer.
That's why I said tens of thousands. Like,
So there's also sometimes the other extreme, and we're not going to jump into cultural appropriation territory right now. But having said that, there's also sometimes this over eagerness to I do recognize sometimes there's a difference between acknowledging spirit forms that are of various Indigenous cultures and communities on this land, and ways to work with them or engage with them, if you will, but know how you're doing that. And then there's sometimes that other extreme of people taking that extra level as a white person that really has no background engagement or true knowledge or foundations within the community that use or work with that spirit in that way. And just that there's a line between respect and cultural knowledge and knowing and connection and listening to just straight out appropriation. And sometimes that line gets a little blurred in our community.
Yeah.
People that with all good intention,
Yeah.
hey, I want to call in this spirit right now into this working. It's like, but you're doing a very white man working right now, and why are you calling that spirit that actually isn't connected to you or your culture in this? But you know, you're talking to a man married to Dionysus. Yes, on my father's side, there's Greek as well, sure. But you know, luckily he's the god who comes. But you know, there's lines between it, and you've got to understand we're talking about a peoples that are still to this day suffering from the privilege of others, and
100%.
that's where the line comes. But that's all it's not a political podcast. I already
No, but like, and that's what I'm saying. We'll never
Sometimes
censor
my
you.
Aries comes into where I just let's burn this shit down.
It's okay. Vicky and I are very candid ourselves, and we've touched on the topic of cultural appropriation many times, because even in the episodes that we've already recorded, we've talked about dream catchers. We've talked about, oh God, I can't even think of the ones. Like, we've talked about chakras.
Like,
we've talked about shamanism. Like, we've talked about
Unnamed Path. Yeah, I was one of the first really big ones who said, no, I'm not going to be initiated as a shaman. In, you know, because it was part of languaging, and David explored part of the histories of that. Do I use shamanic practices and technique? Yes.
Well, shamanic is based on shaman, like the shaman practices. So it's not a copy. It's based on or influenced by, right?
But there's a different languaging of it, because it's also what I talk about it is spirit flight.
Yeah.
And there's that's actually what it is. And you know, there's certain lenses that are used, which have reasons for being there in our tradition. But I'm not a shaman, I'm a witch. And when it comes to that tradition, and yes, do I use shamanic technique? Yes. Am I a shaman? No.
I mean, without opening up a can of worms, we could technically argue that all forms of witchcraft are technically cultural appropriation. Technically, because we've all borrowed. Every culture has borrowed from every other culture, but let's not go there.
But there's a difference between, is it a culture which is continuing to suffer from those that took that? And that's a big difference, which is lost in the detail of the
exactly. And I think it's almost like that catchphrase these days that everyone's like, oh, cultural appropriation. I'm like, hang on a second, wait. First, look up the definition of that phrase before you go throwing it around willy-nilly. And that's one thing that, unfortunately, I see common practice on the internet, because everyone's happy to be a keyboard warrior and call other people out on their appropriation. And I'm like, the fact that you're thinking that that's appropriation is actually appropriating appropriation, because you're now making it mean something it doesn't mean. And I'm just like, mic drop, exit chat. I'm joking. Okay, let's move along.
Move on.
Before we get accused of being.
I just have quickly one question before you move too far. I just had one question about like connecting with the land that you're on. Do you have any advice or anything for people that they can start to explore?
Good save.
What's sort of the best avenues? Do you have any advice or any guidance as to how best to do it, and how to do it in a respectful way and things like that as well? Getting a little bit more familiar with the actual land, like the land that you're on and things like that.
And I guess learn the histories of that land as well, like, you know, and work backwards and work forwards, you know. You know, where I am, you know, there was farming in this area. What kind of farming was it? What brought it here and why? What rivers are here that support that? Well, what are the histories of those rivers? And then inevitably you should be coming to the indigenous histories of that as well. And knowing the name of the lands you're on, it's very easy. Like, thankfully, there are so many tools now to easily identify what land you're on from an indigenous language and what country you're on. Does that mean you then need to, you know, engage in great deep levels on it all? No, but to learn a little bit, if you're by a river, know the histories of that river from an indigenous culture, but also then learn some of the histories of the land that you're around. Now, I live in a very urban environment.
Yeah.
And a lot of us do. And, you know, and it, sometimes as witches, particularly, sometimes we feel like to do the nature witch stuff, we need to go out to nature. But it's going, but are you not breathing the air right now? Is there not a weed coming through the cracks of the footpath? Is there not a bird nearby, whether it be introduced species or not? You know,
still there.
Yeah, this is the first time I've lived in an apartment since like 95. I don't. I've always had like backyards and things like that. I've been always live in a house. So I'm living in an apartment, and I've got plants everywhere. I've got my wormwood, my mugwort, my rosemary, my lavender,
I love it.
all on my balcony.
Yes, I
big
love it.
pot plants. But I connect. I work a lot with bird spirits as well, and that actually comes from my father's side. Strangely enough,
Oh, really?
not a witch, but always spoke to birds. And so I've got a whole family of magpies that I've fed for 4 generations from this apartment now, who come to my balcony, sing to me, and I feed them a variety of food. So please, if anyone's into feeding birds, look at what they naturally need to eat. Don't just give them sausages all the time. But yeah, so but that's part of my spiritual practice, is just basic connection in day to day. Kick your shoes off and walk in the park. Look at the leaves in the trees. What's going on with those leaves? What's going on with the wildflowers in the area? You know, there's simple things that you can do. Like if you've got wattle nearby, then have a look at that. If there's jacarandas nearby, look at that. You know, there's so many different plants that are native that have a story of the time, and just sit with it. You know, be present with it. Do you need to know the deep indigenous knowledge behind it? No, you don't. You like, you know, I'm not telling everyone to go become deep cultural experts in the great histories of everything, but you know, there's simple things that you can at least do, and that's just sit and listen and work with it. So if you're someone who works with plant spirit, then sit and listen to the spirit of that plant. Listen to the spirit of place. You know, and too often in like I'm of a tradition where we work in the upper world, the middle world, and the underworld. And I see a lot of the time there's this seeming romanticism about going upper world or underworld. You know, your underworld is our ancestors, the dead, and all that. And it's like, but what about the spirit of the middle world? What's behind that? And that so often gets forgotten. And there's often excuses going, oh, but I don't live in the bush. It's like, yeah, but
you don't need to.
You don't need to. There'll
be dirt somewhere.
There's always dirt somewhere. There's always a weed crop, you know, cracking through something. There's, you know, nature is there. Look for it and listen to it, you know. And then listening to it is learning how you engage with it. So what are those little things you do in your community? And nature is the people in the community as well. Humans are part of nature. So how do you engage?
We do forget that sometimes, don't we?
We're not a nature or separate, although we think
that's right.
So just doing community work or being involved in community, you know, anything on that level is also part of nature. That's spirit. That is spirit of the middle world. We get this weird disassociation of us and nature. Nature is this thing in us, and spirit of those become this other. It's like, no, missing the point, I think.
And I think you've said it so poetically. Like if anyone that's listening to this, I think like it's a theme, and I don't know whether this is intentional or not, but it's something I've picked up on listening to your whole story and this whole interview. Is the common theme that I'm sensing is sit and listen. In every story you've told us, it's always about sit and listen. And I think as witches, that's probably one of the most important things that we can do, is just to sit and listen, whether that's sit and listen to an elder, or sit and listen to another witch, or sit and listen to nature, or sit and listen to a spirit of an animal or a plant or whatever. It doesn't matter. But just sitting, or even just listening to your higher self, your gods, your whatever. Sit and listen. That's the best thing we can do as witches. It's not about trying to talk.
Yeah.
I say this
Yeah.
as someone who's just created a podcast.
We're just talking.
And he's like, just preach. But the thing is, guys, that in order for us to get to this point and to create a podcast, we, like Vicky and I both independently, we sit and listen, and not just to our own spirits and to our deity and to nature. We sit and listen to one another. Like the amount of stuff that I've learned from Vicky in the
and vice versa
4 months that we've known each other.
Yes.
I feel like I've known her my whole entire life. That's what, like, you know, sometimes we take that for granted. But so I think that if there's one thing that our listeners can take from this, is to sit and listen to each other. Don't go out there, have a conversation with someone because you feel like you can disprove them or that you can impress them with how much you know. Like, it's sit and listen. Like the limited conversation I've had with you, Buck, I walk away from them literally learning. And every time I've spoken to you, I send a message to Vicky, hey, are you busy? And she'll be like, what's up? And I'm like, and then I call her, I'm like, I just got off the phone with Buck. She goes, oh, what did you talk about this time? And then I'm like, wow, he taught me this and this and this and this and this. Because like, I literally just sit there with this inquisitive mind of, you've been doing this longer than I have. I need to pay you the respect that you're owed, which is to sit and listen to you and to take, even if I'm only taking a little grain of the information each time, because it's obviously you're a wealth of knowledge, but not like in my eyes, you are. Like, I respect the people who came before me, which includes you. Like, even if I'm only taking a grain each time, that's still one more grain of knowledge that I'm taking by being respectful enough to listen to you. And I'm hoping that our listeners have been doing the same thing.
I think sitting and listening and doing the work.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What the world doesn't need is any more armchair pagans or armchair witches who own all the books, but are you doing it? And then the other extreme is, you know, we particularly in the last 4 years, there's a certain influence that's really projected that, which is going now, but has been about, there's no conversation, it's just one or the other, everything is black or white. But the art of conversation, the art of being able to listen to points of view that are differ to yours, you know, as soon as you stop learning, then just curl up and die. But
pretty much.
But was part of what, like, I guess when it comes down to, you know, when I was talking about modern witches, and what my concern is everything coming so quick and easy, where there's the learning is in the journey, not in the end product. You know, initiation is the beginning. You know, all of those kind of, I know they sound like cliches, but they're
true though.
Yeah, it really is.
But it's the art of the practice and the journey, and being willing to reinvent to your own vision of things, to break down and reassess. You know, that shadow work isn't something that's done once. You know, a lot of my work is integrating of the shadow, which definitely has been part of my journey. Obviously, a vampire, of course, there's lots of shadows, but in many layers of how that works. But that doesn't mean it's done once and it's done. You keep working. So keep listening, but keep doing. And doing isn't just projecting something, where, you know, where we see, you know, there's this value in just purely something aesthetic. And now I love great aesthetics, don't you?
I mean, with your beautiful backdrop, no, you don't.
It's more, you know, unless there's true substance, or you know the origins behind what led to that. You know, there's so much symbolism which can be explored in aesthetics. There's so much cultural history and languaging as to why an image is done this way, or there's a lighting of that way, or there is a clothing of this choice. Now, you know, there's this celebration of the Insta witch, or the, you know, the TikTok kind of thing, which is, it's an easy projection, and everyone's got something to say. But do they? Like, who's actually really saying something in that? And that's not to say there's not. Like, both of those are incredible platforms to communicate. Incredible.
Yeah, that's right. If you
use it the right way.
I was going to be a smartass and say, in the words of a TikTok witch, okay, boomer.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Yeah, but it's but even outside of that, I know plenty of boomer witches who still need to hear that exact same thing.
Oh yeah.
How about you do the work, and how about you listen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I think, was there any other questions you wanted to ask, Vicky? Because I mean, I could talk to Buck all day,
Yes.
so
I know,
don't ask me.
I know I'm the same. I'm like, I could keep going and going, but I don't.
Don't ask me because I'm already like
You
a
have to
few
have-
drinks in. So, but like I say to all my amazing guests, who like literally, who it feels like a true conversation and a way to, because like I mean, you've touched on it already, but that's why we created this podcast, is because we want to give a voice to all of the witches, all of the different walks of path, so that we can hear from so many different eclectic people, that there's not just one way to be a witch, there's not just one way to do the work, there's not just one way to learn what you need to learn. Like there are so many different ways to do it. So I mean, I'd be more than open to a follow-up conversation down the track. I won't call it an interview. This time was an interview. Next time it's like your family now. Next time it's just a chat. Like, you know, there's no red carpet. There's no fancy. No, I'm just joking. No, but I'd actually love to, like, I mean, fast forward. Let's just say, you know, maybe anniversary of this release date. It's not like I'll forget the date because it will be my anniversary next year. Yeah, because I honestly think that, like, you know, also as we're going to evolve as a podcast as well, we're obviously going to probably want to ask different questions in next time. Who knows? And also would love to hear how the Unnamed Path goes as it progresses as well, because I believe you've got your first group of.
Yeah, so I've got student initiates going through at the moment, which is great. So yeah, we're ticking along, which is really cool. And I guess I want to talk to that point. Sometimes we see evolution as moving forward without the past, where part of my journey, my integration of my so many different layers of my past are all with me. And that's where I know that I'm really moving forward, is sometimes from the outside, they might go, oh, you've gone from this to this to this. It's like, well,
it's all part of you.
They're all part of it.
Yeah.
And they're all that journey, you know. So if anyone listening or watching, whatever,
they do both.
YouTube
or other places.
But you know, if there's different aspects of my journey that people want to know about, I am open if people want to reach out. But particularly for vampire community, it is something that I guess a lot of our listeners wouldn't know anything about. A lot of people don't. So it does have a long history, and there's many different viewpoints of it. You know, you've got houses and covens and all of that, and courts. I have successfully sat on the edge of a lot of them. Yes, I do work with, there's a house here in Australia that I work closely with. There's in America as well that I work with. But my journey is my own. So if people do want to know, I'm always going to give avenues for people to explore, but never give them, this is the way of doing it. I don't believe in that. It's all about your own evolution experience. Like, look at the three of us, you know, witches are such different backgrounds.
Very different people.
And right. Can we learn?
I mean, similarities, but very big differences at the same time.
But that's it. And that's the thing, though. And this is the thing I think is often missing, is that we forget that there's just so much to learn. Like, if you actually just stop, like we've said, is if you stop and listen to other people's points of view, and you learn so many more things. Like, I've learned heaps just in this conversation now.
Yeah, but this podcast, you know, what it stands for is exactly that. You know, let's stop othering each other, and let's stop drawing lines between, but rather find those crosses, those places of crossover and connection, and learn more about ourselves from each other, you know, even if it is from a very different perspective. You know,
Thank you for recognizing that, by the way, because it's something that obviously we say we do it, and we strive to do exactly that. It's about, for us, it's not about pointing out the differences, it's about celebrating the differences and the nuances and the, you know, just
highlighting the similarities in different things that people always
exactly
so completely different. There's
so much crossover. But okay. Anyways, I don't want to open up another can of worms, because I mean, honestly, the next question that comes out of my mouth is going to turn into another conversation. So, Buck, in all honesty, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing.
And so, guys, this if you wanted more information about some of the topics that we're covering, I had it up on my screen and then I closed my phone. So the other episodes that we're talking about, so if you want to hear more about the Unnamed Path, obviously we interviewed David in episode 8. And whilst it didn't specifically come up in this episode, but when Buck was talking about how he kept seeing these random occurrences that happen more than one time, we cover a little bit of that in our episode Omen, Signs and Angel Numbers, which was episode 13. So go back and listen to those, and also the one you could also go back and listen to episode 4, which is about coming out of the broom closet, because as we touched on, we've all come in and out of the closet different phases of our life. So I'm going to
open and close. Come out of the coffin, come out of the broom closet.
That's why
running out of spaces to come out of now.
That's why I love the artwork that we've used for your episode, that straight out of the coffin. It's like straight out of Compton, but straight out of the coffin.
I love it.
But anyways, Buck, so for anyone that's listening, if you want to connect with Buck, please do so. We'll share some contact details, like his Instagram handles and stuff like that, in our posts. And from us, I hope you have an amazing day.
Great.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Bye.